All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining the February Restoring Neighborhoods webinar. My name is Nathan Park. I'm a Policy and Research Associate here at NHC, and I'm looking forward to today's presentation with all of you. Today, we're very excited to have Emily Kadick, the Executive Director of the Affordable Housing Tax Credit Coalition, joining us. When discussing the world of ITEC, we couldn't think of anyone better than Emily to help us understand where we are and what's on the horizon. Before we get started, I wanted to highlight an upcoming NHC event, Solutions for Housing Communications, which is the only national convening designed for housing communicators. Sessions will feature national experts and engaging topics on media relations and digital communication strategies that will help organizations rethink how they communicate with policymakers, media, stakeholders, and constituents. This year's convening will be held on April 16th at the National Press Club here in Washington, D.C., and you can register now at the link listed here, www.nhc.org/solutions. And one final slide before turning it over to Emily. Today's presentation is being recorded, and you will get a link to watch the recording afterwards, as well as access to the slide deck. If anyone has any questions about Emily's presentations, please use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen to ask them. We will get to as many as we possibly can after Emily wraps up the presentation. Finally, if you're having any technical difficulties with the presentation today, please use the help menu or visit the website listed for assistance. With that, I'll now turn it over to Emily Kadick.
Great, thank you, Nathan, and thank you everyone for joining today. I know many of you are probably snowed in today like I am here in DC, so appreciate you taking the time to be part of this webinar. I'm Emily Kadick, and I'm Executive Director of the Affordable Housing Tax Credit Coalition, and we are a trade association of nearly 200 businesses and organizations advocating on behalf of the low-income housing tax credit. And we are also an active participant in the Action Campaign, which is the big tent coalition of all of the groups advocating on behalf of the housing credit. And we are also a proud member of the National Housing Conference, and I'm very excited to be joining you all today. So I'll be talking today about what's next for the low-income housing tax credit in the 116th Congress. And as you all probably already know, the housing credit is our nation's primary tool for building and preserving affordable housing, and it's financed over 3 million affordable homes for low-income families through public-private partnerships since it was created in 1986. So the impact of any housing credit legislation we pass has really far-reaching impacts for our nation's entire affordable housing delivery system. And as you all also know, the program has a strong history of bipartisan support, and we had some really significant fights and significant wins in the last Congress. So first, we had a fight we've been preparing for years in tax reform, where we successfully mobilized to preserve the housing credit and private activity bonds, which provide financing to roughly half of all housing credit developments. And then just a few months later, we got the first expansion of the credit in 10 years, as well as the ability to implement income averaging in the March 2018 omnibus bill, thanks to the advocacy of many of you on this call. I also just want to note that we ended the last Congress with very strong support for the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, which is legislation we'll be discussing today that contains about 24 provisions to strengthen that housing credit. And while we didn't get all of the provisions over the finish line in the last Congress, we did end the Congress with more than 40% of the House and Senate signed on, representing all parts of the political spectrum. So this is the very strong foundation from which we'll begin the 116th Congress and discuss what's next for the housing credit in the new environment. So I wanted to first set the stage by discussing the policy environment in which we find ourselves. So by now, I know everyone is very familiar with the results of the election, but I wanted to provide this visual to highlight that the Senate's makeup is largely the same, though slightly redder, with the most significant shift in the House, where Democrats picked up over 40 seats. And with divided government, all legislation is now going to have to be bipartisan, though there's now also, of course, a much higher likelihood of gridlock. And there are also more than 100 new members of Congress, highlighting a tremendous need for education about affordable housing, I mentioned that more than 40% of Congress had supported our housing credit legislation in the last Congress, but many of those members are not returning, actually close to 50 of them. So while we still have a very strong foundation of support for the housing credit and affordable housing, there are a lot of new supporters and champions that we'll need to cultivate. And there are some very significant changes to the committees with jurisdiction over the housing credit, which are the Senate Finance Committee and especially the House Ways and Means Committee. So with the shift in majority in the House, Democrats were able to add 11 new members to the House Ways and Means Committee, which you can see highlighted here. So that means almost half of the Democrats on the committee are new. And Republicans also added 3 members to replace several who weren't reelected. And now longtime housing credit champion Richie Neal, who was the lead on our housing credit legislation in the last Congress, is the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, while former Chairman Kevin Brady, who you may remember proposed eliminating private activity bonds and tax reform, is now ranking member. Over in the Senate, there are fewer changes to the Finance Committee members, but I wanted to note that Senator Todd Young, who is a strong champion of affordable housing and introduced his own legislation last year that would create an affordable housing task force, was added to the Finance Committee. And in terms of leadership, we knew that Chairman Orrin Hatch, who is a strong champion of affordable housing and was the lead on our Senate legislation in the last Congress, would be retiring, and now replacing him, we have Senator Chuck Grassley, who's expected to focus on oversight in his new role. And many of you will remember that he's the one who commissioned the series of GAO, or Government Accountability Office, reports on the housing credit. And while the reports weren't overly critical of the housing credit, actually had plenty of positive things to say about the program and its administration, it's probably it's safe to say that Chairman Grassley is going to be looking at all tax credits with some degree of skepticism in his new role. So we're now working with a Senate Finance Committee chairman who is not quite the supporter or champion of affordable housing that the previous chairman was, but a House chairman who is much more supportive of the housing credit than the last one. And we'll be working with many new members of Congress on top of that and of the key committees. So that's the landscape we find ourselves in as we work to further expand and strengthen the housing credit in this new Congress, with our primary focus being the reintroduction of the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. So as a refresher, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act is a comprehensive piece of legislation designed to strengthen the housing credit. It was actually designed with tax reform in mind, since we'd been told by the House Ways and Means Committee that any program that made it through tax reform was going to be itself reformed. And we wanted to have a strong set of proposals. Though, of course, because of the way tax reform ended up being enacted through budget reconciliation, none of these reform proposals were actually able to be adopted. But we still think it's a strong set of proposals which have broad industry consensus, and so we're still moving forward to try to get them adopted. And while I won't go through all of the 20+ provisions in the bill, generally speaking, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act is designed to make the housing credit more streamlined and flexible and better able to serve hard-to-reach populations in areas like extremely low-income households and rural and native communities. And one of the provisions that we're most focused on is creating a minimum 4% housing credit rate, which would make more of the 4% rehabilitation and preservation projects feasible and would actually increase affordable housing production by helping us tap into more of the housing credits that are generated by using private activity bonds. So the so-called 4% credit is actually closer to 3.3%, and that creates some really significant equity gaps in a lot of very important and very needed projects that prevents them from moving forward. So that's one of the provisions that's really a top priority for us. And last year, there was also a provision in the Senate bill, but not the House version of the bill, that would have increased housing credit allocations by 50%, phased in over 5 years, part of which, as I mentioned, got done in the March 2018 omnibus. So what we actually got was a 12.5% increase in the annual housing credit allocation effective for 4 years. So not the full 50% increase on a permanent basis we were seeking, but a very important down payment that's going to lead to nearly 30,000 more affordable rental homes being built or preserved over the next decade than would have otherwise be possible. And we also got the income averaging provision that came from the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, which allows for tenants in housing credit properties to have incomes up to 80% of area median income when they move in, which is an increase over the previous limit of 60% of area median income, so long as the average income limit in the property is at or below 60%. So this is a really important flexibility that's already being implemented and is going to make a lot more types of properties viable, from high cost cities to rural areas. Is really broadly supported provision in the bill. So we were thrilled to have these two provisions enacted in last year's omnibus in what was essentially a trade for a tax reform technical correction, which many of you will remember as the brain glitch. And since there were so few tax provisions that got done in the omnibus, it was really an enormous testament to the advocacy power of the affordable housing community that we were able to get these housing credit provisions to the top of that list. And though we're seeking any opportunity to enact the minimum 4% rate and the other remaining provisions from the bill and any other tax legislation that advanced last year, there did not end up being any real opportunities. We were hoping that a year-end tax package would come together, but with the shutdown, nothing ended up moving. So we're now planning to reintroduce the bill with all of the provisions that have not yet been enacted and potentially some new provisions. So, for example, we found that the provisions that help rural areas were really instrumental in helping us build strong bipartisan support and a broad coalition for the bill in Congress. So fortunately, one of the provisions that help rural areas, which is income averaging, has been enacted. But now we're looking at what more we can do to help rural areas to help make sure we still get a lot of those same supporters. So there will be a few changes along those lines, but otherwise the bill is going to be largely the same. And if you want to see a full list of provisions that were in last year's bill, you can view the bill summary from the previous Congress on the Action Campaign website. So our most immediate task at hand is getting the actual legislative text done and finalizing the list of provisions that are going to be in the bill. Then we'll need to confirm our new lead sponsors, which we'll discuss in a minute. And then we're going to determine our first round of other original co-sponsors. So last year, we reintroduced the bill with a bipartisan team of 13 senators and 18 House members, roughly evenly divided between parties. And it would be great to even surpass those numbers this year. The first set of co-sponsors is a really great way to signal strong bipartisan support to other potential co-sponsors and really lays the groundwork for the bill's success. So this is something I hope many of you will be part of recruiting for. And then we'll reintroduce the House and Senate bills and coordinate their introduction with one another and with other affordable housing events, if possible, to try to generate some momentum around the bill. And then we'll continue to add co-sponsors, again, trying to see if we can produce an even stronger list than last year, and then we'll see where we might find an opportunity to advance any provisions from the bill, or ideally, all of them. So for new leads, we've got Senator Maria Cantwell, who is the only one of our first round of leads from last year who's confirmed to be leading again. She is a tireless champion for the housing credit, and very glad to have her continuing this fight. And then her co-lead in the Senate, Orrin Hatch, has retired, so we're still working to secure a new Republican co-lead. And there are several members who are strong contenders. And then it's also possible that we'll actually introduce with 4 leads in the Senate, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. So stay tuned for more information on all of this. Over on the House side, now that Richie Neal is becoming Ways and Means Committee Chairman, he's passing along some of the bills he formally led on to other members, which is a pretty common practice with members who become committee chairs. So Representative Susan Dalbene, who's also a Democrat from Washington, is going to be our new lead. And she's a very strong advocate for affordable housing as well. And in the last Congress, she introduced a bill that would expand housing credit resources. And just last week in a House Ways and Means Committee hearing, on the middle class, she spoke about the importance of affordable housing. So she's clearly following in Senator Cantwell's footsteps and taking any opportunity to raise the issue, and glad to have her working with us on this. And we're also still securing Republican leads on the House side, where once again, there's several strong options, and we may once again have 4 leads instead of 2. So we're hoping to have all of that confirmed in the next few weeks and reintroduce the bills. And then because tax bills generally move as part of a larger legislative package and not on their own, we'll see what tax bills may be coming down the pike and whether there's opportunities to add provisions from our bill. So this could include the extensions of tax provisions that expired last year, known as tax extenders, or technical corrections from tax reform or infrastructure legislation, which is one of the few other areas where we may actually see some compromise between the Democratic House and Republican Senate and White House. And since I get a lot of questions on this, I want to underscore that while it may seem like there may not be many opportunities for bipartisan, bicameral legislation this year, it's important that we prepare as if there may be, because as we've seen many times in the past, deals often come together very quickly, and it's those proposals that already have strong bipartisan support that are easiest to add in. So we have to do the work regardless of what or when opportunities may arise. Otherwise, our proposals could get passed up in favor of others that are more broadly supported, and that means it's always a good time to be engaging with Congress. So as many of you know, one of the best ways, if not the best way, to engage with members of Congress is by showing them the impact of the housing credit firsthand in their states and districts by getting them out to properties. So this can be at groundbreakings or grand openings, but even without a milestone event like that, you can still invite them out for tours or create an event or really anything that allows them to see the finished product and meet with the residents whose lives have been impacted by having an affordable place to call home. And I also know many of you are meeting with your members of Congress and their staff as the new Congress starts, and there's plenty you can do to support the housing credit even in advance of reintroducing our bill. So if your members have supported affordable housing in the past, now is a really good time to thank them for their past support and let them know that this bill is coming down the pike and that we'll soon be reintroducing a bill on the housing credit that we hope they can once again support. And you can also ask that they do more than even co-sponsor the bill when it's out and actually convey their support to leadership to let them know that they want to see legislative action on affordable housing this year. And if your members haven't supported affordable housing in the past or are a new member of Congress, now's a great time to talk to them about the impact of affordable housing in their state district, start laying the groundwork to bring them around as supporters. And I found that it's often helpful to point out what other members of Congress from their state or political affiliation have supported affordable housing in the past, as well as other local groups and constituents who have supported it, because it's a lot easier for a lot of members to sign on if they see that they are among good company. And to help make your case, I'd encourage you to use the resources on the Action Campaign website, which is rentalhousingaction.org. As I mentioned, you can find the bill summary and all the materials about the Affordable Housing Credit Act, Improvement Act from last year, and they'll be updating when we have new ones for this year. And there's also fact sheets like this one about the impact of the housing credit in every state and district, and a lot of other resources. And it's also a great way to sign up to get email updates. You can learn about the latest news and resources when our bill is reintroduced and any other housing credit related news. And then I've also included my contact information, as well as the Tax Credit Coalition's website, which is taxcreditcoalition.org, if you want to learn more about the Affordable Housing Tax Credit Coalition. And with that, I will open it up for any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. That was super insightful. Just as a reminder, if people do have questions, so please enter them into the questions box on the right, and we will answer them now. We do have a question that reads, when do you expect the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act to be reintroduced? I am aware of a couple organizations that plan to make this the focal point of Hill visits in early April.
That's a great question, and that should be great timing. we are hopeful that we can get the bill reintroduced sometime in March. We got to make sure we go through the process of finalizing the language and getting that right, and then getting all of our leads together. But we are aiming for March and optimistic that it should be done by then, and it's certainly by, I would hope, by the time that Hill visits are coming around in early April. Though again, even if the bill is not yet introduced then, I think that it'll probably be pretty close. And so it should be possible to at least get a lot of members lined up to commit their support, even if they can't officially co-sponsor yet.
Great. Just because I see another question about slides, so if you weren't plugged in at the beginning, the slides as well as a recording of this webcast will be sent out to everyone who registered, so you can get them that way. If anyone else has questions, please submit. Give it a few more moments. All right, well, if those are all the questions that we have today, again, Emily, I'm sure you would be willing, if you reach out to her, to ask questions directly. Again, thank you so much to everyone who attended and listened in today. Thanks again to Emily for being here and presenting. And we're looking forward to the next Restoring Neighborhoods webinar with everybody. Enjoy your snow day. Have a good one.